The icy wind bit through Eleanor Sullivan's thin clothes as she ran beneath the silver moonlight, her breath coming in sharp gasps that clouded before her face. Behind her, the distant thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, the men who claimed to own her closing the distance with each passing second. Arizona Territory, 1878, a place where a woman's freedom was as fragile as morning dew on a cactus flower. Eleanor had been sold to the Blackwell brothers when she was just 18, traded by her stepfather to settle a gambling debt. 3 years of servitude in their brothel had hardened her in ways she never thought possible, but it hadn't broken her spirit. Not completely. Not yet. The bruises on her wrists and the cut above her eye were fresh reminders of what waited if they caught her. The border was close, she could feel it more than see it. Mexico lay just beyond, a place where perhaps she might disappear, where the Blackwell's influence might not reach. But her stolen horse was tiring, and the riders behind her were gaining ground. When she crested the hill and saw the lone figure silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky, her heart nearly stopped. A man on horseback, waiting. Another hunter, a bounty collector. There was nowhere to run but forward now. As she approached, she could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A cowboy, by the look of him, with a bandana around his neck and a revolver on his hip. "Please," Eleanor begged as she reined her exhausted horse to a stop before him. "They're coming. They'll kill me." The cowboy's eyes flicked from her face to the approaching dust cloud, then back to her. He studied the bruises on her face, the desperation in her eyes. "Go," he said simply, moving his horse to block the path. "Straight south. Don't stop until you reach Santa Rosa." "But they'll go," he repeated, drawing his revolver. "I'll handle this." Eleanor hesitated for only a moment before digging her heels into her horse's flanks, urging the animal forward. Behind her, she heard the cowboy call out to the approaching riders, his voice calm but firm. "That's far enough, gentlemen." She didn't look back, not when she heard the shouting, not when she heard the gunshots. She rode hard, her heart pounding as fiercely as her horse's hooves on the dusty ground. Eleanor rode through the day, stopping only when her horse threatened to collapse beneath her. She found shelter in an abandoned mine shack as the sun began to set, curling into a corner with a blanket she'd stolen along with the horse. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams filled with the sound of gunfire and the image of the cowboy standing alone against her pursuers. She didn't even know his name, but she owed him her life. She hoped he still had his. Morning came harsh and bright. Eleanor's body ached from the hard ride and harder ground. She had a few coins and supplies to last maybe 3 days, not enough to start a new life, not nearly enough to feel safe. She was gathering her meager belongings when she heard the approach of a horse. Fear froze her in place, but there was nowhere to run. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching a rusty piece of metal as a weapon. When the door creaked open, she nearly collapsed with relief. It was him, the cowboy from the border. He was alive, though there was a bloody bandage wrapped around his left arm. "You're a hard woman to find," he said, his voice low and rough. "Figured you might need these." He tossed a small sack toward her. Inside were provisions, jerky, bread, a canteen of fresh water, and a small purse of coins. "You're hurt," she said, noticing the way he favored his wounded arm. "It's nothing." He shrugged. "A scratch. The Blackwells, they won't be following you anymore, not for a while at least." Eleanor studied him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were the sort of kindness she'd almost forgotten existed. "Why did you help me?" she asked. The cowboy removed his hat, revealing sandy hair that fell over his forehead. "My name's Quentin Adler," he said, ignoring her question. "Most folks call me Quinn." "Eleanor Sullivan," she replied. "Though, I've been called Olivia for so long I sometimes forget." She touched the pendant at her throat, a small silver oval with her real name engraved inside, the only thing she had left of her mother. "Well, Eleanor Sullivan," Quinn said, settling himself on a crate by the door. "I reckon you've got quite a story to tell." She told him everything: her mother's death when she was 15, her stepfather's gambling and drinking, the night he'd lost big to the Blackwell brothers and offered her as payment. She told him about the brothel in Tucson where they'd kept her, about her first escape attempt that had resulted in a beating so severe she couldn't walk for days. She told him about the other girls, some willing, most not, and about the customer who'd left the door unlocked, giving her this final chance at freedom. Quinn listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as her tale unfolded. When she finished, he nodded once as if confirming something to himself. "I'm heading north," he said, "to Nevada. There's a small town called Genoa in the eastern foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. My uncle has a ranch there. It's good country, quiet, far from Arizona." He paused, studying her face. "You'd be welcome to ride along, safety in numbers." Eleanor wanted to refuse. Trusting men had never served her well. But something in Quinn's steady gaze made her reconsider. He'd had plenty of opportunities to harm her if that had been his intention. "Why Nevada?" she asked instead. "My uncle's getting on in years. Asked me to come help with the ranch. I've been working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas, but I'm tired of the trail." He smiled slightly. "Figured it was time to put down some roots." Eleanor thought about Mexico, about her hazy plans to find work in a border town. The reality was she had no real prospects, no friends, no skills beyond what she'd been forced to learn at the brothel. Nevada sounded impossibly far and safe. "I can cook," she said finally. "And so I could work for my keep at your uncle's ranch, at least until I figure out what comes next." Quinn nodded. "That seems fair. We'll leave at first light tomorrow. Should take us about 2 weeks to reach Genoa if the weather holds." That night, Eleanor slept better than she had in years, despite the hard ground. The next morning they set out together, heading northwest through the desert. Quinn rode a few paces ahead, his rifle across his lap, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Eleanor studied his broad shoulders, the straight line of his back. He wasn't much for conversation, but the silence between them was comfortable. When they made camp that evening, he insisted she take the only bedroll while he slept with his saddle for a pillow. "You ever fired a gun?" he asked as they sat by the small fire. Eleanor shook her head. "Never had the chance." Quinn reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small revolver. "This was my mother's," he said, holding it out to her. "It's not much, but it's reliable. Tomorrow I'll teach you to use it." She took the weapon carefully. It was lighter than she expected, with a pearl handle that caught the firelight. "Thank you," she said, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Everyone should be able to protect themselves," he replied simply. The next morning, Quinn set up empty cans on a fallen log and patiently showed Eleanor how to load, aim, and fire the revolver. Her first shots went wild, but by midday, she was hitting the cans more often than not. "You're a natural," Quinn said with a rare smile. "Keep practicing, and you'll be out-shooting me before we reach Nevada." As they traveled, Eleanor began to notice small things about Quinn: the way he always made sure she ate first, how he would hum softly to the horses while brushing them down each evening, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to her horse's sore hoof. He never asked about her time at the brothel, never made her feel ashamed of her past. A week into their journey, they encountered a family traveling south in a covered wagon, a young couple with 2 small children. The woman, Mary eyed Eleanor's bruised face with sympathy, but asked no questions. Her husband, Peter, shared news of a stagecoach robbery near the territorial line. "They say it was the Clayton gang," Peter said as they shared a meal around the campfire. "They've been hitting stages all through this territory." Quinn nodded. "We'll keep an eye out. Thank you for the warning." That night, after the family had continued on their way, Eleanor found Quinn standing watch at the edge of their camp, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "The Clayton gang is bad business," he said. "If they're operating in these parts, we need to be extra cautious. You know them," Quinn's jaw tightened. "I know of them. They don't just rob, they kill, and worse." He turned to face her. "We should change our route, head west for a bit before turning north again." Eleanor nodded, trusting his judgment. "Is that how you got that scar?" she asked, gesturing to the thin line that ran from his left temple to his jaw. She'd been curious about it since the first day. Quinn touched it reflexively. "No, this was from a different fight, a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and Eleanor didn't press. The next morning they altered their course as Quinn had suggested, traveling through rougher terrain. The going was slower, but they saw no sign of other travelers, which Quinn seemed to prefer. As they made camp on the 10th night of their journey, a storm blew in from the west. Quinn quickly constructed a lean-to against a rock face, creating a small sheltered space that was just big enough for both of them if they sat close together. The rain came down in sheets, turning the ground to mud and sending small rivulets of water cascading down the rocks around them. Thunder crashed overhead, causing the horses to stamp nervously despite Quinn's efforts to calm them. Eleanor huddled beneath a blanket, watching the storm rage. Quinn sat beside her, his shoulder pressing against hers in the confined space. The warmth of his body was a comfort against the damp chill of the night. "I've never seen rain like this," she admitted, pulling the blanket tighter. "Desert storms are fierce but quick," Quinn replied. "It should pass by morning." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Eleanor jump, and Quinn instinctively put his arm around her shoulders. She tensed for a moment, then slowly relaxed against him. "I'm sorry," he said, starting to withdraw his arm. "No," Eleanor said quickly. It's nice. I'm just not used to being touched like this. Kindly, I mean." Quinn was silent for a long moment, his arm still around her. "No one should ever touch you any other way," he said finally, his voice low but fierce. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart starting to crumble. She turned her face into Quinn's shoulder and began to cry, silently at first, then in gut-wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. 3 years of fear and pain and humiliation poured out of her in a torrent as powerful as the storm outside. Quinn held her through it all, one hand gently stroking her hair, the other keeping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He didn't shush her or tell her everything would be all right. He simply held her, a solid presence in the chaos of her emotions. When her sobs finally subsided, Eleanor pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," Quinn replied, handing her a clean bandana to dry her eyes. "Everyone needs to let the poison out sometimes." Eleanor wiped her face, grateful for his understanding. "How did you become so wise?" she asked, attempting a small smile. Quinn's expression grew distant. "My father was a hard man, mean drunk. My mother took the brunt of it until she died when I was 12. After that, it was my turn." He absently touched the scar on his face. "I left home at 16, worked any job I could find. Learned that there are 2 kinds of men in this world, those who use their strength to hurt, and those who use it to protect." Eleanor reached out hesitantly and touched his scar, tracing it lightly with her fingertip. "And you chose to protect." Quinn caught her hand in his, holding it against his cheek for a moment before gently lowering it. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Eleanor protested. "I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn," he promised, though they both knew he wouldn't. Eleanor settled into the bedroll, listening to the rain and the steady sound of Quinn's breathing beside her. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. The storm passed by morning, as Quinn had predicted, leaving behind mud and swollen streams that slowed their progress. They spent the day picking their way carefully through the terrain, stopping early to make camp when they found a suitable site near a freshwater spring. As Eleanor prepared a simple meal from their provisions, Quinn disappeared into the brush with his rifle. He returned an hour later with a pair of rabbits, which he quickly skinned and prepared for cooking. "Where did you learn to hunt?" Eleanor asked as they roasted the meat over the fire. "My grandfather taught me before he died," Quinn replied. "He was Cherokee on my mother's side. Taught me how to track, how to move silently through the forest, how to respect the animals that give their lives for our sustenance." Eleanor watched as Quinn bowed his head briefly before taking his first bite of rabbit, a silent thanks to the animal's spirit. There was a depth to him she hadn't expected when she first saw him at the border, a gentleness beneath his weathered exterior. "Tell me about Nevada," she said as they ate. "What's Genoa like?" Quinn's face lightened. "It's beautiful country, mountains to the west, high desert to the east. The town itself is small but growing, has a hotel, a courthouse, a few stores. My uncle's ranch is about 5 miles outside of town, up in the foothills. Good grazing land, plenty of water. He raises cattle and horses mostly. And he won't mind you bringing a stranger." "Uncle James has a soft spot for strays," Quinn said with a small smile. "Besides, he's always complaining about needing help around the house. His wife, my Aunt Sarah, died 2 winters ago. Pneumonia." Eleanor nodded, trying to picture the life Quinn was describing. It sounded peaceful, normal, everything her life hadn't been for the past 3 years. "I won't stay long," she promised. "Just until I can save enough to move on." Quinn frowned slightly. "There's no need to rush off. Genoa's a good place for fresh starts." The conversation drifted to other topics: Quinn's experiences on cattle drives, Eleanor's memories of her mother, the books they'd both read. As darkness fell, Eleanor realized she was smiling more than she had in years, laughing at Quinn's dry humor and feeling, for brief moments, like a normal young woman enjoying an evening by the fire. That night, as she settled into her bedroll, Eleanor found herself watching Quinn as he made his customary check of their perimeter before sitting with his back against a tree, rifle across his knees. In the moonlight, his profile was strong and steady, his presence a comfort she was growing accustomed to having near. She wondered what it would be like to kiss him, a thought that startled her with its suddenness and intensity. Men's touches had meant nothing but pain and degradation for so long that she'd forgotten there could be pleasure in intimacy. The realization that she wanted Quinn's touch not because she was forced to accept it, but because she genuinely desired, it was both frightening and exhilarating. Eleanor closed her eyes, pushing the thought away. Quinn was kind and honorable. He'd never shown her anything but respect. She wouldn't repay his decency by making unwanted advances, wouldn't risk the safe companionship they'd established. The next morning brought clear skies and easier terrain. They made good progress, crossing into Nevada territory by midday. Quinn seemed to relax slightly once they passed the territorial border, though he remained vigilant. 2 more days to Genoa if we maintain this pace, he said as they stopped to water the horses at a small stream. Eleanor nodded, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. "I've never been to Nevada before." "It's good country," Quinn repeated, his eyes scanning the horizon. Different from Arizona. Harsher in some ways, but honest about it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. Like you, Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Quinn looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. I try to be, he said after a moment. That evening they made camp earlier than usual. Quinn spent time teaching Eleanor more about shooting, then showed her how to build a fire using only small pieces of kindling and a single match. Resources are precious out here, he explained as he guided her hands, showing her how to arrange the twigs. You never know when you'll need to make one match last. His closeness as he knelt beside her made Eleanor's heart beat faster. She could smell the leather of his vest, the faint musk of sweat and horses that clung to him after a day's ride. When their hands touched, she felt a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with fear. Quinn must have sensed something because he pulled back slightly, clearing his throat. You've got the hang of it, he said, rising to his feet. I'll check on the horses. As he walked away, Eleanor remained by the small fire, watching the flames dance. She recognized the look in his eyes before he'd turned away interest, attraction, quickly masked by propriety. Quinn desired her too, but was too honorable to act on it, too concerned about taking advantage of her vulnerable position. She smiled slightly to herself, finding unexpected joy in the realization. This feeling, this mutual attraction, was something the Blackwells had never been able to take from her, though they'd taken nearly everything else. The ability to want and to be wanted, freely and without coercion, was still hers. When Quinn returned, Eleanor had prepared coffee and was heating the last of their beans over the fire. They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely around them. Tell me about your uncle, Eleanor said as they finished their meal. What kind of man is he? Quinn smiled. Uncle James is unique. Fought in the Mexican War, then came west with the gold rush in '49. Never struck it rich, but he found something better land that spoke to him. He's rough around the edges but fair, treats his ranch hands like family. He paused, adding quietly, he took me in one summer when things were bad at home. Never asked questions, just put me to work and let me be until I was ready to talk. He sounds like a good man, Eleanor said. The best I've known, Quinn agreed. You'll like him. And you think he'll like me? Eleanor couldn't keep the uncertainty from her voice. Quinn's eyes met hers across the fire, steady and certain. He'll see what I see, a survivor, someone with courage and determination, someone worth knowing. Eleanor looked down, overwhelmed by his words and the conviction with which he spoke them. I'm not sure I'm the person you think I am, she said softly. The things I've done, the things I've endured, they've changed me. Of course they have, Quinn replied. Fire either forges or destroys. You're still standing. They lapsed into silence again, but it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken understanding. When Eleanor finally retired to her bedroll, she fell asleep quickly, dreaming of mountains and pine forests and a home she'd never seen. The penultimate day of their journey passed without incident. The landscape had changed gradually as they traveled, the desert giving way to scrub, and then to scattered pines as they moved into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. The air was cooler here, crisp with the scent of pine and sage. In the late afternoon, they crested a ridge and Quinn reined his horse to a stop, gesturing for Eleanor to join him. Below them stretched a wide valley, green with spring growth, a silver ribbon of river winding through it. In the distance, snow-capped mountains rose majestically against the sky. Carson Valley, Quinn said, a note of pride in his voice. Genoa's just beyond that line of trees to the west. Uncle James's ranch is up in those foothills to the northwest. Eleanor took in the vista, barely able to comprehend the beauty of it after so many days in the desert. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Quinn nodded, his eyes reflecting the pleasure in hers. "Come on. We can make it to town before nightfall if we push on." They rode down into the valley as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Eleanor felt a growing nervousness with each mile that brought them closer to Genoa. This journey with Quinn had become a sanctuary of sorts, just the two of them, removed from the world and its judgments. In town, reality would intrude again. People would look at her, would wonder about her, might even recognize what she had been. Her fears must have shown on her face because Quinn reached across the space between their horses to touch her arm lightly. "It'll be all right," he said. Genoa's a small town, but folks mostly mind their own business. No one needs to know anything about you that you don't choose to share. Eleanor nodded gratefully, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. They rode on, following a well-traveled road that wound through stands of aspen and pine. As the sun touched the western mountains, they emerged from a grove of trees to see the town of Genoa spread before them. It was smaller than Eleanor had imagined, just a few dozen buildings clustered together, with a main street running through the center. A white church steeple rose above the other structures, and smoke curled from chimneys as the evening chill set in. It looked peaceful, ordinary, welcoming. "We'll stop at the hotel tonight," Quinn said as they rode into town. "Get a proper meal and a good night's sleep. Head out to the ranch in the morning." The Genoa Hotel was a two-story wooden structure at the north end of town. Quinn helped Eleanor dismount, then led the horses to a hitching post while she waited on the porch, suddenly conscious of her travel-worn appearance. Inside, the hotel's lobby was simple but clean, with a polished wooden counter and several comfortable-looking chairs arranged near a stone fireplace. A plump, middle-aged woman looked up from her ledger as they entered, her eyebrows rising slightly as she took in their dusty, trail-worn state. "Quinn Adler," she exclaimed, her face breaking into a broad smile. "James said you were on your way. We'd about given up on you." Quinn smiled warmly. "Mrs. Donovan, good to see you again. The trail took longer than expected." He turned slightly. "This is Miss Eleanor Sullivan. We'll need 2 rooms for the night." Mrs. Donovan's eyes flickered between them, curious but not judgmental. "Of course. Got a nice room at the back for the lady quieter there, and your usual for you, Quinn." She handed them each a key. "Dining room's open until 8. Bathhouse out back if you want to wash off the trail dust." Eleanor accepted her key gratefully, following Quinn up the narrow staircase to the second floor. He showed her to her room, a small but tidy space with a real bed and a washstand in the corner. "Take your time getting settled," he said from the doorway, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. "I'll meet you downstairs for dinner in an hour." Eleanor nodded, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of a private room with a door she could close and lock herself. After Quinn left, she explored the space, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt on the bed, opening the small window to let in the cool evening air. The bathhouse behind the hotel was blissfully empty when Eleanor visited it. She sank into the warm water with a sigh of pleasure, scrubbing away 2 weeks of trail dust and allowing herself, for the first time, to think seriously about what came next. Quinn had been nothing but kind, asking nothing in return for his protection. His uncle's ranch offered a safe haven, at least temporarily. But what then? Genoa was small. What opportunities would there be for a woman alone, especially one with her past? Would she always be looking over her shoulder, fearing that the Blackwells might somehow find her? She dressed in the cleanest of her meager clothes, a simple blue cotton dress that had seen better days, and made her way downstairs to the dining room. Quinn was waiting at a small table by the window, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He stood when he saw her, his eyes warming as he took in her appearance. "You look rested," he said as he held her chair. "Amazing what a real bath can do," Eleanor replied with a small smile. "You clean up well yourself." The dinner was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Quinn watching her with quiet pleasure. "Uncle James doesn't know I'm arriving tomorrow," Quinn said as they lingered over coffee. "I thought we might surprise him." "Are you sure that's wise? Bringing a stranger without warning?" Quinn's expression softened. "You're not a stranger anymore, Eleanor, and James won't see you as one either, not when you arrive with me." There was something in his tone that made Eleanor's heart beat faster. She looked down at her coffee cup, gathering her courage before meeting his eyes again. "Quinn, I need to ask you something. Why did you really help me that day at the border? You could have been killed." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "I was riding patrol for the Cattlemen's Association. There'd been rustling in the area. When I saw you coming, saw the men chasing you." He shook his head slightly. "I recognized the look in your eyes. It was the same look my mother had when she was running from my father." Eleanor reached across the table, touching his hand lightly. "Thank you," she said simply. Quinn turned his hand beneath hers, his calloused fingers entwining with hers briefly before he pulled away, aware of the other diners in the small room. "We should get some rest," he said, rising from the table. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch from here." He walked her to her door, standing a respectful distance away as she unlocked it. "Sleep well, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and warm. "You too, Quinn," she replied, lingering with her hand on the doorknob. For a moment she thought he might step closer, might bend to kiss her goodnight. Instead, he touched the brim of an imaginary hat and turned away, heading down the hall to his own room. Eleanor closed her door, leaning against it with a mixture of disappointment and relief. Whatever was growing between them, it would unfold in its own time. There was no rush, no pressure. For the first time in years, her future stretched before her, full of possibilities rather than dread. She slept deeply that night, waking only when sunlight streamed through her window. After a quick breakfast in the hotel dining room, she met Quinn at the stables, where he was already preparing their horses. "Ready?" he asked as he helped her mount. Eleanor nodded, adjusting her borrowed hat against the morning sun. She was nervous about meeting James, about stepping into Quinn's world, but the excitement of new beginnings outweighed her anxiety. They rode out of Genoa, heading northwest, following a well-maintained trail that wound through meadows dotted with wildflowers and stands of aspen trees. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and sage. In the distance, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose majestically, their peaks still capped with snow despite the spring warmth in the valley. "It's even more beautiful in the daylight," Eleanor said, taking in the landscape around them. Quinn nodded, pride evident in his expression. "Wait until you see the ranch. Uncle James picked the best spot in the valley." As they rode, Quinn pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his childhood visits to the ranch. Eleanor listened, captivated by this glimpse into his past, and by the way his usual reserve melted away when he spoke of this place he clearly loved. After about an hour, they crested a small rise and Quinn reined his horse to a stop. Below them lay a cluster of well-maintained buildings nestled against the base of a forested hillside. A two-story house with a wide porch stood at the center, surrounded by a barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Fenced pastures stretched away to the east, where cattle and horses grazed in the morning sun. "Adler Ranch," Quinn said, a note of homecoming in his voice. As they approached, A tall figure emerged from the barn, a man with silver hair and a weather-beaten face that broke into a wide grin when he recognized Quinn. "Well, I'll be damned," he called, striding toward them as they dismounted. "The prodigal nephew returns." Quinn embraced the older man warmly. "Uncle James, good to see you." James Adler stepped back, clapping Quinn on the shoulder as he took in his nephew's appearance. Then his gaze shifted to Eleanor, curiosity evident in his expression. "And who might this lovely lady be?" he asked, removing his hat. "This is Eleanor Sullivan," Quinn said, a protective note in his voice. "Eleanor, my uncle James Adler." Eleanor extended her hand, which James took gently. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Adler. Quinn has told me much about you and your ranch." "Has he now?" James glanced at his nephew with raised eyebrows. "Well, any friend of Quinn's is welcome here. Come on inside, both of you. You must be tired after your journey." The ranch house was spacious and comfortable, with worn but well-made furniture and large windows that let in the morning light. James led them into a kitchen where a pot of coffee simmered on the stove. "Sit, sit," he insisted, pouring 3 cups. "Tell me everything. How was the trail? Any trouble?" Quinn gave a brief account of their journey, carefully edited to omit the circumstances of their meeting. Eleanor was grateful for his discretion, though she knew the full story would have to emerge eventually. "And you, Miss Sullivan," James said, turning to her. "What brings you to Nevada?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I was in a difficult situation in Arizona. Quinn helped me leave it behind. He said you might have work here on the ranch, at least temporarily." James studied her thoughtfully, his kind eyes taking in her faded dress and the fading bruise on her cheek. "We can always use an extra pair of hands," he said after a moment. "Especially in the house. It's been just me and the ranch hands since Sarah passed, and I'm afraid housekeeping has suffered for it." "I'm a good cook," Eleanor offered, "and I can sew, clean, do whatever's needed." "Then you're hired," James said simply. He turned to Quinn. "Show Miss Sullivan to the guest room, the blue one at the top of the stairs. Then come back down and tell me the parts of your journey you left out." Eleanor flushed, but James waved away her concern. "Don't worry, my dear. We all have stories we'd rather not tell. You're safe here, whatever yours might be." Quinn led Eleanor upstairs to a pleasant room with blue and white curtains and a view of the mountains. "I'll bring your things up," he said. "Take some time to settle in. Uncle James doesn't stand on ceremony. Meals are informal, work is shared." When he'd gone, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean quilt. The room was simple but charming, with a small writing desk beneath the window and a braided rug on the wooden floor. It was more permanent than anywhere she'd stayed since leaving her childhood home. She crossed to the window, looking out at the ranch spread before her. In the distance, a cowboy on horseback was moving a small herd of cattle toward a different pasture. The scene was peaceful, ordinary, worlds away from the brothel in Tucson. Downstairs, she knew Quinn was telling James the truth about her, about the Blackwells, about her escape, about the men he'd confronted at the border. She couldn't hear their words, but she could imagine James's reaction. Would he judge her, ask her to leave? Or would he be as understanding as Quinn believed? When Quinn returned with her saddlebags, his expression was unreadable. "Uncle James would like to speak with you when you're ready," he said. Eleanor nodded, smoothing her dress nervously. "Did you tell him everything?" "Yes." Quinn hesitated, then added, "He's a good man, Eleanor. Trust him." She found James in his study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered with ledgers and maps. He looked up when she entered, gesturing to a chair across from him. "Quinn told me what those men did to you," he said without preamble. "What they forced you to do." Eleanor sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes," she said simply. My sister Quinn's mother suffered at the hands of her husband for years before pneumonia took her, James continued. I offered her sanctuary here many times, but she always went back to him, convinced she had no choice. His eyes were sad but kind. Everyone has choices, Miss Sullivan. You made yours when you ran. That took courage. Eleanor felt tears stinging her eyes but blinked them back. I don't want your pity, Mr. Adler. Good, because I'm not offering any. What I am offering is a fresh start. A job, a roof over your head, and the respect due to any hard-working person. He leaned forward slightly. Your past is your own business. In Genoa, you'll be judged by who you are now, not who you were forced to be. Thank you, Eleanor whispered, overwhelmed by his acceptance. There's just one thing, James added, his expression growing serious. Quinn. He's a good man, the best I know. But he's also a man who takes on other people's burdens as his own. He brought you here because he feels responsible for you. I know, Eleanor said. I don't expect anything from him beyond the kindness he's already shown me. James studied her for a long moment. It's more than kindness, I think. I've known that boy since he was in short pants. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. He sighed. Just be careful with him. His heart is as big as the Nevada sky, but just as easy to cloud over. I would never hurt him, Eleanor said with quiet conviction. James nodded, apparently satisfied. Then we understand each other. Now, why don't you get settled in? Dinner's at 6. Nothing fancy, but we eat well here. The next few days passed in a blur of new routines and introductions. Eleanor met the ranch hands, 6 weathered cowboys who treated her with awkward courtesy after a stern word from James. She learned the layout of the ranch, the rhythms of its daily operations, the location of everything in the kitchen and pantry. Quinn divided his time between showing Eleanor the ropes and working alongside the ranch hands, mending fences, checking on the cattle, and breaking a new horse for the remuda. He was careful to maintain a respectful distance when others were around, but Eleanor often caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. On her 4th day at the ranch, Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when Quinn approached, leading his horse. I'm riding up to the north pasture to check on some strays, he said. Thought you might like to come along, see more of the ranch. Eleanor smiled, pleased by the invitation. I'd like that. Let me finish this and change. 20 minutes later, they were riding side by side along a trail that wound through a pine forest at the edge of the ranch property. The day was perfect clear blue sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine needles. How are you settling in? Quinn asked as they emerged from the trees into a high meadow carpeted with yellow and purple wildflowers. Well, I think, Eleanor replied. Your uncle has been very kind. Everyone has. Quinn nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. They're good people. Even Hanson, though he's gruffer than a bear with a thorn in his paw. Eleanor laughed. The ranch foreman, Lars Hanson, was indeed gruff, but he'd shown her nothing but respect, even complimenting her biscuits at breakfast that morning. They rode in companionable silence for a while, climbing gradually toward a ridge that overlooked the northern section of the ranch. When they reached the top, Quinn dismounted, helping Eleanor down from her horse. The view was spectacular. The entire Carson Valley spread out below them, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the mountains rising majestically to the west. Eleanor caught her breath, overwhelmed by the beauty and vastness of it. This is my favorite spot on the ranch, Quinn said, standing beside her. Uncle James brought me here the first time I visited. Told me that a man should always take time to see the big picture, to remember that his troubles are small in the grand scheme of things. It's magnificent, Eleanor said softly. Makes me feel both insignificant and important at the same time. Does that make sense? Quinn nodded, his eyes on her face rather than the view. Perfect sense. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze playing with Eleanor's hair, loosening strands from the simple bun she'd fashioned that morning. Quinn reached out hesitantly, tucking a wayward strand behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low and uncertain. She turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "Yes, I." He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I want you to know that you don't owe me anything. Not for helping you at the border, not for bringing you here. You're free to stay as long as you want or to move on whenever you choose." Eleanor studied his face, the earnest blue eyes, the firm set of his jaw, the scar that traced his left cheek. "I know that," she said. "I've never felt obligated to you, Quinn. Grateful, yes, but not obligated." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Good, that's good." Eleanor took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Is that all you wanted to say?" Quinn's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "No," he admitted, "but I'm not sure I have the right to say more." "Because of what I was?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the breeze. "No," Quinn said firmly. "Never that. Because of what you've been through, because you deserve time and space to heal, to find your own way forward without complications." Eleanor smiled slightly. "And if I told you that your feelings, whatever they might be, aren't complications but clarifications? That they help me see a future I couldn't imagine before?" Quinn's expression changed, hope replacing uncertainty. "I'd say that my feelings are stronger than they should be for someone I've known such a short time. That from the moment I saw you riding toward me at the border, something in me recognized something in you, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." Eleanor moved closer, placing her hand lightly on his chest. "I feel it too," she whispered. "It terrifies me and exhilarates me all at once." Quinn covered her hand with his own. "We can take it slow," he promised. "There's no rush, I needed you to know." "I know," Eleanor said. "And I'm not going anywhere, Quinn, not for a long while." He bent his head slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that asked rather than demanded. Eleanor responded tentatively at first, then with growing confidence, her free hand coming up to rest against his cheek. When they parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. "Uncle James will start to worry." Eleanor nodded, though she was reluctant to break the spell of the moment. As Quinn helped her back onto her horse, his hands lingered at her waist, his eyes holding a promise of more moments like this to come. The ride back to the ranch was filled with shy glances and tentative smiles, both of them adjusting to this new understanding between them. As they approached the ranch buildings, Quinn reached over to touch her hand briefly. "Would you walk with me this evening?" he asked. "After dinner." Eleanor nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I'd like that." James gave them a knowing look when they returned, but said nothing beyond asking about the strays Quinn had gone to check on. At dinner, Eleanor was acutely aware of Quinn across the table, of the way his eyes sought hers when Hanson was telling a story about a mountain lion they'd spotted near the eastern pasture. After the meal, when the dishes were washed and put away, Quinn found Eleanor on the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Ready for that walk?" he asked, offering his arm. They strolled toward a small pond at the edge of the property, the first stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Frogs sang from the reeds at the water's edge, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "It's so peaceful here," Eleanor said as they stopped by the pond. "Sometimes it's hard to believe that just a few weeks ago I was running for my life." Quinn's arm tightened around her waist. "You're safe now," he said. "The Blackwells will never find you here." Eleanor leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I know, it's just. Sometimes I still wake up afraid, thinking I'm back in that place, that this is all a dream I'll wake from." Quinn turned her gently to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "It's real, Eleanor. I'm real. What we're building here is real." She looked up at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than he knew. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It is." His kiss this time was deeper, more confident, and Eleanor responded in kind, her arms slipping around his neck as she pressed closer to him. In his embrace, the last shadows of her past seemed to recede, replaced by the warm certainty of his affection. When they finally returned to the house, James was sitting in the parlor, reading by lamplight. He looked up as they entered, his eyes taking in their clasped hands and flushed faces. "Good evening," he said mildly. "Nice night for a walk." Quinn cleared his throat. "Uncle James," James held up a hand, cutting him off. "No need to explain, son. I've got eyes." His expression softened. "Your Aunt Sarah and I courted for exactly 2 weeks before I asked her to marry me. When it's right, it's right." Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm, but Quinn's hand remained steady in hers. "Thank you, Uncle James," he said simply. That night, as Eleanor prepared for bed in her room at the top of the stairs, she found herself humming softly a song her mother used to sing, a melody she'd almost forgotten. For the first time in years, her future seemed full of promise rather than dread. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm: work during the day, walks with Quinn in the evening, quiet conversations on the porch as the stars came out. Eleanor's cooking became legendary among the ranch hands, her biscuits and apple pies particularly sought after. She planted a garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the rich Nevada soil. Quinn taught her to ride better, to shoot with greater accuracy, to recognize the tracks of different animals in the forest. In turn, she shared with him her love of books, reading aloud in the evenings from the volumes in James's library, while Quinn carved small wooden animals with his pocket knife. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor found herself fully integrated into ranch life. She rode out with Quinn to check on the cattle, helped with the summer branding, and even accompanied James to Genoa for supplies, where he proudly introduced her to the townspeople as family. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, she no longer woke in terror but rather with the comforting knowledge that she was safe, that Quinn was just down the hall, that the Blackwells were far away in Arizona. One warm evening in late July, Quinn took her back to the ridge overlooking the valley. They'd been there many times since that first visit, but something about Quinn's demeanor today was different, a nervous energy she hadn't seen in him before. They reached the top just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the valley in gold and amber. Quinn helped her down from her horse, then took her hand, leading her to the edge of the ridge. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "about the future, about us." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Have you?" Quinn nodded, turning to face her fully. "When I met you at the border that day, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. I just knew I couldn't let those men take you." He took both her hands in his. "Now I can't imagine my life without you in it." Eleanor smiled, squeezing his hands encouragingly. "I feel the same way." Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a ring, simple but beautiful, with a small sapphire set in silver. "This was my mother's," he said. "One of the few things of hers I managed to save after she died. Uncle James has been keeping it for me." Eleanor's breath caught as Quinn dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Eleanor Sullivan, I love you more than I thought possible. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, happiness expanding in her chest until she thought it might burst forth like sunlight. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Quinn, I will marry you." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a joy that matched her own. When they finally parted, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "Uncle James already knows I was planning to ask you," Quinn said. "He's been hinting about grandchildren," Eleanor laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Has he now? Says the house is too quiet, needs the patter of little feet." "Well," Eleanor said, winding her arms around his neck, "we shouldn't disappoint him, should we?" Quinn's smile was like sunrise breaking across his face. "No, madam, we surely shouldn't." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, arriving just as darkness fell completely. James was waiting on the porch, a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses on the table beside him. "Well?" he asked as they approached. Quinn's arm tightened around Eleanor's waist. She said yes. James's weathered face broke into a wide grin. "Of course she did. She's a smart woman." He poured 3 measures of whiskey, handing one to each of them. "To new beginnings," he toasted, raising his glass. "To family," Quinn added, his eyes on Eleanor. "To love," Eleanor said softly, completing the toast. They were married 2 weeks later in the little white church in Genoa. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers from neighboring properties, and even a few travelers passing through. Eleanor wore a dress of ivory silk that the ladies of the town had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair and Quinn's mother's ring on her finger. Quinn, standing at the altar in a new suit, watched with wonder as she walked toward him on James's arm. In his eyes, Eleanor saw everything she'd ever wanted: love, respect, partnership, a future full of promise. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Forever," he whispered against her lips, a promise and a vow. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the trees and lanterns hanging from the branches. There was music and dancing, food and drink, laughter and storytelling long into the night. Eleanor, moving among the guests with Quinn's hand warm in hers, felt a sense of belonging she'd thought lost forever. Later, when the last guests had departed and James had tactfully retired to the bunkhouse for the night, Quinn carried Eleanor across the threshold of the ranch house, their home now, as James had insisted. He led her upstairs to the master bedroom, where fresh flowers had been placed on the dresser and new linens adorned the bed. "Mrs. Adler," Quinn said softly, drawing her into his arms. "I like the sound of that." Eleanor smiled up at him, all nervousness gone in the face of his love. "So do I, Mr. Adler. So do I." That night, in the gentle darkness of their room, Quinn showed her what love between a man and a woman was meant to be: tender, passionate, mutually giving. In his arms, Eleanor found healing for the last of her wounds, the final pieces of her heart made whole by his careful touch. As they lay together afterward, Quinn's arms around her and his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here from the horror of the Blackwell's brothel to this haven of love and security. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Eleanor smiled against his chest. "That sometimes the darkest roads lead to the brightest destinations." Quinn's arms tightened around her. "And sometimes a split-second decision at a border crossing changes everything." "Thank God you said go," Eleanor murmured. "Thank God you trusted me enough to come back," Quinn replied. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The years that followed were good ones for the Adlers. The ranch prospered under Quinn's management, with James gradually stepping back to enjoy his role as advisor and, eventually, grandfather. Eleanor gave birth to their first child, a son they named William James, just 10 months after their wedding. A daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, followed 2 years later, and then another son, Michael Thomas. 2 years after that, the Blackwells never found them. News eventually reached Genoa that the brothers had been killed in a shootout with a U.S. Marshal in Tucson, ending any lingering fear Eleanor had harbored about her past catching up with her. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Eleanor back to the ridge overlooking the valley, their special place. As they sat together watching the sunset, their 3 children playing nearby under James's watchful eye, Quinn put his arm around her shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice warm in her ear. Eleanor looked at their children, William chasing butterflies, Sarah constructing an elaborate arrangement of pine cones, baby Michael dozing in James's arms. She thought of their home in the valley, of the life they'd built together, of the community that had embraced her without question or judgment. "Not a single one," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Except perhaps that I didn't meet you sooner." Quinn kissed her temple. "Everything happened exactly when it was meant to," he said. "Not a moment too soon or too late." Eleanor turned her face up to his, seeing in his eyes the same love that had been there on that first day at the border, the same steady strength that had given her the courage to rebuild her life. "I love you, Quinn Adler," she said softly. "And I love you, Eleanor Adler," he replied, bending to kiss her as the last rays of the setting sun gilded the valley in gold, a fitting benediction on the life they had forged together from the ashes of her past. In the years that followed, the Adler Ranch became known throughout Nevada territory for its fine horses, its generous hospitality, and the remarkable partnership at its heart. Travelers passing through Genoa often heard the story of the cowboy, and the woman he'd met at the border, a tale that grew in the telling until it became almost legendary. But Quinn and Eleanor knew the truth was simpler and more profound than any legend. That sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, we find the courage to say go or the faith to start anew, and in doing so, discover the love that will carry us home.